It's an iron oxide that is a drier, and it's the quality of all that organic brown that you see in the Renaissance, the luminosity, that comes from the iron oxide dryer varnish. Well, the gel formation lets you then start with after you draw in the subject, you can paint the dead color in with the same varnish, and it's all drying, and whatever you don't touch remains fixed. So you can have all the different layers fixed in the painting all in one sitting, right up through the dead color, which is absorbed by the foundation paint of this iron oxide gel. And then you have the painting, which includes glazing at the end of fixing the color. So you can do all of these steps all in one sitting. And if you notice, it really is painting as fast as your inspiration allows you. This happened for the old master painters. They had it. And Rembrandt, in his area of Amsterdam, the apothecaries carried these gel formation pigment varnishes in the apothecary. They were in powders, and they just applied linseed oil and turpentine to it and created this medium. The effect of it was so spectacular that in the area of 60 square miles in the Netherlands, there were 800 painters painting with this medium. And in the years of the Dutch Republic, in 1600 to 1680, basically the dates of Rembrandt's life, give or take a few years, these 800 painters painted 10 million paintings, it's estimated. Just a barbaric amount of painting. It's so swift. They were actually in Van Mander, who was noted as the author of the Da Vinci, the Sari of the North, stated a few artists that were using these mediums to the extent that one character would paint his clothes with it and walk around the streets in the rain, and it would be waterproof. Another character used it, he painted finger paintings. It's like, since it's a gel, it's very much like finger paints. And this one other artist was a character, and he painted portraits with his fingers. And then he painted the outside of his building and made it history. It's just an incredible invention. However, as soon as the old masters died, none of them wrote down this formula. So it became lost. when they died. And then art went into what was called the mini dark age for 150 years. It was hard to believe, but these painters were scientists, really, with their formulas, because they used every gradation of mineral salts to create colors and boost the saturation of the pigment was like just brilliant. And when they died, it was as if painting died. And then for the next 150 years, there's a whole stream of very dark painting because people couldn't control the iron oxide dryers. They couldn't control the pigments. They literally, painting just closed like a sun setting on the theater dropped the curtain on painting, and it started the 1700s. It was over. What happened next is tube paints were invented in 1841 by Winsor Newton. And so it was a revival of painting. And it started mostly in France. And the tube paints were very advantageous for painters painting landscape at plein air. And painters just gravitated to it. However, they didn't realize that the tubes dried hard if they put resin in the tube. So they took the resin out of the formulation of paint. Paint had oil, resin, and pigment throughout the Renaissance. And the resin was the shiny part of the pigment, where the oil was the mixing part of the pigment. So the shiny part no more existed. It was now these painters were painting flat paint because they didn't have resin in the paint. And by 1772, excuse me, 1872 is the designation of when Impressionists started painting. By that time, they were starting to be called painters of light. But in reality, they were the first conceptual painters because they had to redesign painting by painting in the high chroma level and using pinches of black and violet and blue to represent shadow because they couldn't paint luminous brown shadows. So it was within 40 years that Impressionism became Pointillism, Cubism, Surrealism, and Fauvism, Surrealism, and then you had modern art within a quick 40 years because of this abstract formulation of shadow. So this is a short history of oil paint and its definition. The other thing that people don't realize is that was a Flemish contribution to painting. But then there was the Italian contribution to painting. And that is that they were the ones, they didn't worry so much about their technique because they painted bigger paintings. They were interested in covering large walls. The paint would dry quickly anyway, the oil paint. So it didn't need to have so much of the gel effect of the painting wasn't, of the varnish wasn't as primary. But they were interested in creating stylistic inventions like perspective, Alberti's perspective, like mannerism, Baroque styles of creating imagery. And all of this started at the same year as the oil painting started in 1435 with Brunelleschi's dome. It just created a new formulation for art. It was all happening in Florence, the start of the Renaissance, with they used Cellini's method of tempera painting with egg emulsions, and then they used gum arabic for their illumination, which is a very fast drying resin that works with water. And they developed their technique using these stylistic inventions of design, which was really the basis of the brilliance of the Renaissance. You had the Humanist period, which was very much like the primitive period of the Dutch. And then you had the Mannerist period, which was a way of painting that is called alla maniera, as the hand goes, finish as the hand goes, which was led by Pontormo. And it was a type of painting that you did the forehead, the head, the shoulders, the arms, you finished the torso, the legs, and you went and you as you went. However, it created huge distortion in the paint because it got away with them when they were painting. If you ever analyze a Pontormo, there's this elongation. It looks like a really exaggerated torso with, like there's way too many vertebrae in the back, or it just became very conceptually not very strong. But then you had Michelangelo, who started as a Mannerist painter and opened up and invented the Baroque style, which was to accommodate the growth of the size of the palaces and the areas of painting were humongous, like he was painting the Sistine Chapel, which was a great surface, 4,000 square feet, or 5,000 square feet. It was estimated with Raphael and Bramante, who kind of nudged Julius II to get Michelangelo to do this deadbeat ceiling, which had all these salts coming through it. It wasn't finished in the Sistine Chapel. And they were planning on putting Michelangelo away they estimated that bone fresco takes only 1.5 meters of painting a day. It would have taken him 40 years to finish the project. But he reinvented fresco painting so that he reversed the layout. When you do a painting, whether it's in oils or in tempera, you put out the drawing, then you tone the drawing for light and shade, then you color the drawing, and then you glaze the color on top to unify the painting. Well, in bone fresco, it was, at the time, Michelangelo was best friends with Vasari and Armanini, and they were the paint dealers and the fresco, and the standard of fresco raised with them. Michelangelo, what he did was he switched over the method of painting. He pounced on the charcoal pouncing of the figure, and he then painted, while the fresco was still dry, wet, a shade of, if he was painting a pant leg that was green, he would paint the shadow side in green and the light side in yellow, and painted out all the different effect, all the different drapes, figure work. He would paint this, that's why you see the very pastel colors now, because it's been restored. It's been restored to its underpainting by John Colalucci in the last cleaning. So he could paint 15 square meters this way a day. He didn't even pounce the ancestors, which are below the impediment. He just painted them freehand. All in realizing that he was going to use a lamp black glaze over the whole ceiling to unify the discrepancy in the shadow of and the light of the tones of every drapery and every figure that he painted in. Because this is the part, instead of using the black and white at the beginning like a natural oil painting, he used the black and white at the end. So that's how he was able to finish the ceiling in 4 years. which is what happened was Colalucci was the head restorer, and he cleaned off one of the stanzas, the coronation of Charlemagne, with a soda reactant called AB52 that cleaned everything off that wasn't Bonfresco. Of Charlemagne, because they had all these numerous flags in the background that were covered over because the Pope just decided he didn't want them. Fresco to life, but it was done in Bonfresco, where when he convinced the Signoria to clean the Sistine Chapel with this soda reactant, they cleaned off all the glaze off the ceiling and turned it into a cartoon, this beginning stages of a painting. I was in Rome at the time. I was up on the scaffold seeing it. I got invited to touch the Michelangelo. And in the streets in the morning, wake up and they would say, Michelangelo, the new Fauves painter in the Giornata. It was terrifying to see, to touch it, and how abrasive it was after this soda reactant made the surface where it had this patina on it. It was all gone. And that's the way it remains today. The mistake that these scientists made was they thought that the ash from the lamps was coloring the ceiling, when actually they took atmospheric tests in the chapel at 65 feet high, and these and the particles of soot from the lamp only goes up to 3/4 of the height. It can never touch the ceiling. So it was a great misunderstanding. Does anybody have any questions about my book? Yes.
A couple things. Fascinating, thank you. Very fascinating talk. But why the Flemish and the Dutch first? Why is that in that area of the world where those masters started?
Well, you have to understand that the city-states of Italy were all in competition with each other. Florence and Venice were hated each other, Milan, even Napoli. They were all independent. The city-states in the Netherlands all decided to unite and come first with a united. They realized that if they could produce the best products, they would get the trade. So they, instead of fighting with each other, everybody, like Venice, for instance, would have been the prime subject, and I had a studio in Venice. It would be the prime location where the invention of oil painting would have been discovered. But since they were so cautious, they had assassins. They moved their fireworks, they moved their kilns to Murano in 1285 BC, AC, because they wanted to get away from anybody stealing their secrets, because that was how they earned their revenue. They were glass producers. So they didn't advance like the northern painters in the Dutch. environment. There they had, wow, I mean, they had Antwerp had running water with barges that had boats that had lifts for cargo. Streets were paved in stone. They were real. They had the Bursa. They had the first post office. They had the first insurance companies. They had the first.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yes.
My first question is with Michelangelo, he did dark and then light. He did thick painting on the thick painting, and then you said he applied the glaze of dark and light, black and white. Is that like with
No.
white? Is that what you're saying? Is that
Michelangelo pounced his drawing on. He had a perforated paper, you know, where they pounce it on the wet stucco, and you have a gray dotted outline of the figures. And in that figure, he noted the core shadow between light and dark and painted a light orange and then a violet separated by the core shadow. And he did this with all his, he would block out a 15 square foot fresco. And then knowing at the end that when he put the black glaze on, it would unify the two different colors and make it the form transition.
Can I go again?
Sure.
So what, obviously, you have this history of yourself that's enormous. So when you were 5, did you start picking up a paintbrush? How did this all develop with you?
My dad,
All start. I mean, you're a college professor here. How did it start with you?
my dad was a wannabe artist. He grew up wanting to be an artist, but his dad died, and he took over the family business, and he, which was olives, and so he was an olive merchant from Spain. He actually married my mom, who was Spanish, in Seville. But he loved painting. He started out as a painter and then had to take over the family business. And when I was 8 years old, he handed me a brush. He also had me grinding pigments while he painted portraits on weekends. And I would sit in the corner of the studio and grind colors for him as he called them out. So I've spent 60 years grinding pigments. And the question has always been, what am I going to grind them with? And that's what these oils are that I discovered. And I discovered them, I really didn't discover them on my own. It was like a gift of God. A friend of mine wanted to learn how to paint motifs on some, he was a harpsichord maker, and he wanted to put little vignettes, paint little vignettes on top of the keyboard. And he traded me some violin recipes, some antique violin recipes that he had gotten in his travels for showing him how to paint. And one of these recipes was a gel formation varnish that I looked at and I said, this is really something. When I tried it, it converted my paintings from this era. All of a sudden, what I was painting before made it look like black and white compared to what I was using when I was using this varnish. It just enhanced the color. It allowed you to create illusion because you could create dimension in the fact that you had these pockets of transparent browns, transparent, translucent tones that literally are the negative space that you don't look at, but you have to have the realism to be able to form a valid painting, I mean, an inspired painting. So another question?
What's the formulation of the gel?
It's in the book. It's an iron oxide, iron and zinc oxide resonate varnish, and it's a soap first, and then the soap is an emulsifier. Yes, when you make the soap, a pine soap, in the Demern manuscript, who was Rubens' doctor, always noted that everything smelled of pine. And if you ever make this resin, it smells just like pine. And there's a real catch. There's a little catch to the formulation of making it, and you can read it in the book. But if you don't do this one little element, the gel never sets up. So it was totally lost to the Dutch school, but they never wrote it down. So that way, the only person who got close to it is Sir Charles Eastlake in his treatises on Renaissance art. He got down to the black and white varnishes. The zinc varnishes doesn't give off color. It's the plain varnish that you paint with. But the iron oxide varnish is the varnish that sets the foundation for the painting to have paint put on it. It just is absorbed. It just sucks in all the linseed oil and dries it. So they were very cautious of using an iron oxide ciccative because it was so powerful. They had to dilute it to 5%. And after they died, nobody did that. So when you painted with an iron oxide paint, it just kept eating away at the surface of the paint. And it caused the alligator effect. If you ever restore paintings, you see it very often. It's like your wallet or your leather belt has an alligator effect to it. It's just, the paint it's so acidic, it never stops biting into the paint.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. I've learned so much that I did not know, so thank you so much. I'm sorry.
Yes, Don.
One other question. In your book, you mentioned the man, I believe his name is John Braley, who was the
Head curator.
of
Yes, correct.
Even after the Velázquez paintings are removed, the varnish and the spoiled paintings, did he ever admit that he made a mistake?
Well, he wrote in his how he thought he was going to be assassinated in Spain. He basically, not assassinated, but he basically said, I'm scared to walk the streets because of what I've done. He put the whole country in tears. I was friendly with Javier Carrion, who was the head restorer at the Prado, that let him use his workshop to clean Las Marinas, and he cleaned it with his really made arrangements with the New York Met. I think it came down to something like, we're going to trade you, you're going to need air conditioning, we're going to clean your paintings. He used Sotomayor's, who was the head director of the Prado then, niece, who was an up-and-coming restorer. He and his niece, within 3 weeks, took acetone, basically, and cleaned off the layer of linseed oil glazes. Linseed oil is such a beautiful oil because it has a cross-linking membrane. It's like this, and it's not soluble to anything but toluene, methane, methyl alcohol, and that's about it. So when you clean it off, he made a big mistake. He didn't realize that Madrid is in the center of this big desert, really, it's basically a desert conditioned climate. And when he put on the methacrylate varnish to restore the color that he had taken off, it precipitated a bloom. And they took the painting and hung it in the staircase for a couple of years because it had a blossom to it, and it had to. It was a tragedy. He had he cleaned off all the Velázquez and had an international show at the Met. And you saw 6 legs on the equestrian horse. You saw 2 butts on the Velázquez was probably the most worshipped painter in the world. That painting of Las Marinas, he was known by Manet to be the first impressionist. That painting of Marinas, Las Marinas, had its own room in the Prado, and it had a screen in front of the window that lit the painting from left to right, where on the left side was Velázquez painting his own self-portrait, where he's got the cross of Malta on his chest that the king painted on him. And it had a mirror on the back wall of this room that you walked into. And it created this effect that you had the court painting with the king and queen on a mirror on the wall. They're visiting their court. And you looked up into the mirror, and the people in the room were migrating in to the court as one unit. It was like a complete hologram. To feel like you saw the people mingling in front of the painting, but they were part of the court. It was the most incredible effect I've ever seen from such a humble painter. Anyway, Las Merinas, the women, the girls in waiting.
Did anyone else have any questions? No. Well, thank you so much. That was really amazing. Peter's books are in the back over there, and he'll be signing them, and you can buy them in the bookstore. And there's wine and cheese, so please, there's some of Peter's paintings in the back to enjoy.
Yeah, you can see the technique alive in those paintings back there. There's a Bacchanal that I copied from Rubens, and you can look at that painting. I copied it in one sitting because of these paints. It is totally vivid, and it's just the color. It's just you can't reproduce it otherwise.
Thank you, and please continue to ask questions. And